Hi there! Welcome back to another video on my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the cartoonification of book covers and basically why people are all up in arms about that. So if you're into some cold tea, just keep on watching. So yes, I know. This topic is a bajillion years old by now. Like the last time I saw somebody talk about this was probably like maybe last year, I think. I feel like it's one of those topics in like the book community or bookish spaces. Sorry, man, I can't talk today. Where things get recycled over and over again. I feel like this is one of those topics. I just want to give you guys my opinion on this thing. Why do I get to have an opinion on this thing? I am a writer myself, although I don't do my own cover art because I do not possess said talent. I commission a lot of book covers for myself. So I kind of know a little bit of what goes on in that process, just a smidge, and I know about book marketing. So yeah, those are my qualifications, I guess. Cartoony book covers. I've noticed that this has been a trend for quite some time, namely in romance spaces, but not limited to romance spaces. The most recent book that I read that has this sort of art style in it is Arsenic and Adobo. I literally just finished this yesterday. Here, I'll zoom in for you. But this is a cozy murder mystery. It has this cartoony type cover that is in style with a lot of romance covers lately, where it's a very graphic image of the title character mostly, and maybe a secondary character or romance person or a romantic interest. If you look on the back, there's also more cartoony depictions of knives and arsenic and a dog. I don't hate this art style, but it's definitely not for me, but it is very, very popular amongst commercial fiction. Most romance books that I've seen have had this sort of cover design on them. I'm just going to keep popping in a few examples on screen here. And for me, I don't really know what this art style is called, but it really screams millennial to me. Don't ask me why. There's just something about it that screams a millennial aesthetic. And I don't know if it was because we saw a lot of this in like advertisements and commercials and stuff while we were growing up or what, but something about this sort of style screams millennial to me. Will this be popular in a few years from now? I don't know, but it's caused a lot of stir online basically, and the main culprit behind that is actually a book called Icebreaker. It is a romance book. It's very, very popular, and it also has what is called spicy content, which is just explicit content for adult readers, right? A lot of TikToks I've seen online have really been criticizing this book, not just for the writing in it, of course, but a lot of criticisms I've seen have been predominantly from men, actually, but that's just my personal experience. But like a lot of criticisms I've seen of this book is that like the cartoon cover is misleading, and parents might think that this kind of book is, or Icebreaker, or the books with this kind of art style on it might be misleading and for children, right? And so therefore romance books or books with like adult content in them should not have cartoony covers because it is reminiscent towards children, and then parents are picking up these books for their children, and then kids are reading sexually explicit content. Although I assume a lot of these arguments are well intended, I find a couple of holes or like potentially concerning logic behind said arguments, right? So obviously this is not as much for murder mysteries, although maybe it's inappropriate to for a young one to read about death. I don't know, probably. Actually, yeah, probably. I feel like part of this is this conversation that happens with a lot of different forms of art. People were having this conversation about Cardi B's concerts a long time ago, and then again recently. Oh, and Lady Gaga's concerts. But then again, recently for Sabrina Carpenter's concerts, where people were taking their kids to those shows and then being upset when they're dancing in provocative clothing or having lyrics that have sexually explicit content in them. How many times am I going to say that in the video? Sexually explicit. Woo! My thing is like, how are you going to spend money on something when you don't know what it is? The frugal person in me could never. But also, it's like, you agreed to take your kids to something like this and you don't know what they're listening to, or you don't know what they're reading. What? And I get it's like hard for parents to monitor every piece of media that your children consume, but this isn't just an issue with romance books, but it's also an issue with music. From what I understand, it's also an issue in animation itself. Just because it's a cartoon doesn't necessarily mean it is only catered for children or that no adult cartoons exist out there. I'm sure we're all aware that like The Simpsons, Family Guy, South Park, Beavis and Butthead, they all exist and they all cater to an adult audience. Something that I know has been happening a lot in the convention scene or the cosplay scene or convention scene is that you have little ones engaging with like has been hotel fandom stuff. And although I've never seen Has Been Hotel myself, I've been meaning to, just haven't gotten around to it. I know that there's very adult themes within that show. I mean, all the characters are in hell after all, and there's probably a reason why they're there. But there's some characters, I believe one's actually named Angel Dust. So it is very clearly an adult cartoon, even though it might have an animation style that maybe kids would like because it's like colorful and stuff. But again, just because it's cartoony and colorful doesn't necessarily mean it's only made for children. And I just wanted to talk about that, like as an adult who still consumes cartoons and stuff, like that is something that I always found really weird is that how people associate with cartoons with childhood. So that's why it's hard for me to really like fully embrace that narrative that like if it's a cartoon cover, it it definitely means that this is childlike, because that logic isn't present in myself. Like you guys know, I'm a big I like anime and I like manga and hence I love JoJo. JoJo isn't really like I guess childish or cartoony, but look at this man. Look at Dio. Look how beautiful he is. Anyway, so I watch anime, even anime that is intended for a younger audience. Like right now, I'm watching Toilet Bound Hanako-kun. It's so good. And I'm really, really enjoying it. But I also enjoy other cartoons that are like more designed for kids than anime. Where I really like Gravity Falls. I'm a big Adventure Time fan. Of course, I was young when I first started watching Adventure Time, but it's my comfort show now as an adult too. But then yeah, it's hard to make that argument if you are somebody who watches a lot of anime or reads a lot of manga, because you know that just because it's a cartoon doesn't mean it's child friendly. I mean, look at Food Wars. That is my guilty that's my guilty pleasure, and I know it's so problematic. I know I'm gonna get roasted, but I don't care. I watched Food Wars and I really enjoyed it. But again, if you are not an adult, you probably shouldn't be watching that show. Yeah, so again, just because it's a cartoon does not mean it is designed for children. And I feel like people who don't engage in animation or the art form at all don't really understand that. It's not like a black and white medium or a black and white thing. So that's why like I give myself a little bit of leniency when it comes to these romance books because again, like for me just cuz it's cartoon doesn't necessarily mean it's strictly childish, right? I heard this from somebody and I find it really interesting. I heard one perspective that was talking about how, you know, back in the day, with a lot of romance books, they used to have this like bodice ripper imagery on them, where it's like this sexy guy with like really long hair and abs and like a pirate shirt, like flowing in the wind, and like that would indicate what's inside is like a bunch of steaminess on the cover. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely romance covers that still have that on them. I've seen romance covers that are literally just a picture of somebody's abs. and and that's what they're selling is like photorealistic or a picture of abs, and they put it on there and they have some like title like his she wolf or some shit like that. I don't know. but they definitely do sell books like that too, right? It's not just only cartoons being worked in romance, but that works for a certain type of customer. If you are somebody who doesn't feel shame for carrying around a book with abs on it, if you're like, no, girl, I don't care. I'm bringing this with me to the park. Go ahead, go ahead. But there's some people that are a little bit more discreet about that kind of thing, right? Like they don't want the world to know that's what they're reading, or even if they're reading it at home, there could be still this sense of shame around reading materials like that, right? So some people prefer to have a more discreet looking cover for their romance stories for that reason in particular, right? They just want that so that they feel more comfortable or that they can ease into the material. And maybe one day they'll turn into the bodice ripper or the sexy abs book reader. But today they're not. Today they aren't, and that's okay because we, as an American society, and I can only speak on American society because that's what I grew up in, is very shameful. Like it's very like taboo to talk openly about sex, to engage with sexy materials in general, especially in a lot of places like in the Midwest where I'm from, or like in the South, or in these like repressive religious communities, it's a big no-no to have any of that around you. So having a discreet book cover might help people who live in those sorts of areas have access to certain like romance stories that they might not otherwise would have if somebody saw them buying somebody's titties right on the book cover. So, I mean, it serves a purpose, right? It serves a purpose. And I think that's why the cartoonish book covers are so popular, is because maybe there's more of a market for discreet romance readers than there are uh it's just straight up explicit ones. And again, I'm like giggling, but like I'm not making a judgment either way. Like at the end of the day, like you market your book how you want to. And it's up to the consumer to know what they're getting into. There's also this thing with like words on the back of the book. There is a description on the back of the book that will let you know what goes on in here. And sometimes, granted, sometimes there's people who don't put that, or they don't market that specifically on the back. But if you hear words like steamy or spicy or things like that, that's a good indicator that there's going to be something a little bit more provocative in said book. Again, there's nothing like that in this one. That's a good indicator for that. Or, you know, before you purchase, you can quickly Google online to be like, is there any spice in this? Or if you read a couple of reviews online, I'm sure you'll be able to get that right away. Most people are very honest with their reviews and forthcoming when it comes to that kind of stuff. So it's a good way to just double check if you're not sure. Also, again, I don't want to assume this because you never know. But a lot of times with these certain romance books, I see them either marketed at the front as new and popular, or in their respective categories as romance, right? Rarely do I see them being put into something like YA or, you know, kids lit. Now, that's not to say that there might be some YA books with a little bit more varying degrees of what, you know, maybe cuss words or certain actions there are in that, because again, that's a varying age, right? And like I don't necessarily write strictly for YA, so I'm not sure what's considered acceptable, because everybody's definition of acceptable is going to be different when it comes to like teenagers and stuff. Like I know if I had kids, and I don't have kids, if I had kids, I would probably be a little bit more lenient when it comes to like swear words or having romantic experiences like that, because that's part of life, and I don't really believe in shaming somebody for being curious about certain things. But not every parent is that way, right? So I don't know. Anywho, so yeah, mostly they aren't necessarily stocked specifically in the YA section, but like I said, when in doubt, you can always Google. And you know, your kids are gonna want to see things and read things that are above their maturity level anyway. I know I did growing up. I also had the internet, so I like read that on the internet away from my parents, you know. But I don't know what kids do these days. So yeah, there's that. I mean, young people are going to be curious about that stuff, and it's your job as a parent to either safely introduce them to that, or, you know, set boundaries and be like, you know what, we don't really have that in our household, I guess. So there's that. But yeah, it's hard. I don't know what a good substitute would be if there is any. Again, I'm not trying to pass judgment. If you want to use this to kind of cartoony style to market your book, more power to you. It is not my taste personally, like not my aesthetic. I make it feels so millennial to me. Another book that has something similar, but it's a little bit more like illustrative, is Legend and Lattes. So again, for this one is completely like no spice. It's a very slow, cozy romance. And I really like this series, but it is like a queer romance story, right? That takes place in like a traditional fantasy setting. But you have the two title characters here too, right? Where you have the main character and then the love interest right here. And I feel like with romance, like again, that's the best way to kind of market your book, because it's all surrounded by the characters. Like the narrative is driven by the characters and their relationships with one another. Whereas if you had something like sci-fi, it might be more driven by the concepts, right? Or the world building or the political conflicts within it, which is more abstract and like harder to depict than a straight up romance, which is all about the sort of interpersonal relationships of the characters. So since it's character driven, you want to have your characters on your cover. So this is like another way to do that. Yes, it's still cartoony, but this is done a little bit more illustrative style, if you can see that. And I feel like a lot of fantasy books are a little bit more illustrative. I can go ahead. Do I have an extra copy? Like, I'll show you my book. So my first book, Cursed Fate, is a dark fantasy, and I do have my title character on the front. But again, this is done in a very illustrative style, and it's a little bit more vague. It wants to capture a feeling of like dark, magical aquatic creatures. Like if you see there's like fish and tentacles and stuff, and then on the back, please ignore my old haircut. There's more of that aquatic imagery right here, right? You have the coelacanths or the coelacanths, sorry, the coelacanths and like tentacles and stuff like that. So you still have this like really whimsical imagery because again, it's not just about the characters, but it's about the world building. But that's a whole different genre, right? That's gonna work for my genre, but that might not work for romance because what else is there besides the characters' relationships? I mean, they can still explore themes of like gender or like class or race and like other stuff like that too. But again, it is the social communications that define romance, right? So yeah, that's kind of like my little spiel about book covers. Again, I'm not an artist. I don't know. I just know that I have books and I try to market my books. I know a little bit about that of what kind of covers do well and don't. The book cover I get the most compliments on, honestly, is Curse Images. People love this cover, and I think it's because it's meant to invoke a feeling more so than like again about a specific character, where it's like bright pink and teal and they like reminds you of a certain time period, right? But then there's something lurking in the computer and you're like, ooh, that's kind of scary. So again, it captures a vibe very instantly and people can relate to that. But again, that's not going to necessarily work for a romance novel that is catered to just like character descriptions, right? Do the cartoonification of book covers, like, do I think this is going to disappear anytime soon? Soon, not really, but like with all trends, I feel like it is going to come and go. Hopefully, there'll be one day where people can just, they might do a little bit more like photorealistic depictions again. But that's just going to be whatever the market thinks it's popular. And right now, the cartoony people on romance books are incredibly popular right now, which again, I think is a very millennial thing. But maybe when Gen Z comes up, they'll have another sort of artistic preference or art style. And maybe they'll like a book cover that's more aesthetically pleasing in a different way. Maybe they'll like neutral tones instead, or maybe they'll stick to certain color palettes, or maybe they'll, I don't know, stick to like if it's about a coffee shop, coffee and like a heart on it, yay. More simplistic things. Like honestly, who knows? I would just advise people who are really concerned about that they just kind of seek out other things that speak to them. Or if you're concerned about your kids getting a hold of a book just because it looks cartoony, that you double check with your kid. Plenty of people on Book Talk that can help you out with that. Plenty of reviewers that will review romance books specifically with like these types of book covers on them. Yeah, I just really hope that like I've noticed personally that we're really in this like pearl clutching phase right now as a society. I know that's like a countercultural thing because we've had so many years of like progressive things going on. And then all of a sudden we're in a recession again and people want to regress because they want a simpler time, I guess. I don't know why. But we do have a lot of more Puritan type beliefs becoming mainstream. A lot of that has to deal with like, oh my god, I can't believe you're reading this sexy romance book on the train in front of everybody else. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm reading it. I'm not masturbating to myself. Excuse me, but like, if they want to read it, go ahead. That's not affecting you. You don't know what it is unless you do know, and then you're like, oh. I guess I don't know. Sorry, I'm like so graphic right there, but it's just like the idea that people are policing other people's reading experiences kind of makes me feel some kind of way because I feel like romance has gotten a lot of criticism as a genre lately. And again, I don't read a lot of romance and I don't write a lot of romance, but I know the demographic for romance is predominantly women. And it just feels like every time something within a female dominated space gets popular, it is intensely criticized. And so much so that like I kind of talked about this with I made a video, I think it was an anti-intellectualism one, where I was talking about how people want to portray themselves as one type of reader as opposed to another, right? They'd rather perceive themselves as somebody who reads the classics and is intelligent and is more intellectually evolved than somebody who just reads romance or like dirty books or like whatever. And then my argument is like, why is there a separation of the two in general? Like, you can also be somebody who's very sexually active and somebody who is also very, very intelligent. The two do not like they can coexist. They don't live on different planets. And it's crazy to me that people still put forth these again very black and white arguments instead of looking at like something holistically. And so that's how I feel about romance. It's like, yeah, there's some stuff that's just meant to be like pure entertainment and silly and goofy and like not taking that seriously at all. But you can still enjoy that and nobody should judge you for it. you know? You could do like, you could be reading the classics one minute, but then have another copy of, I don't know, Ice Barbarians, I guess, right next to it, and, like, that's fine too. There you don't have a this dichotomy, that it's not a this or that, and I feel like those conversations aren't really carried on the internet very well, and also with this, like, again, Puritan, like, thinking is trickling into, like, academic online spaces as well. Which again, I grew up in the era of like a girl can't be smart and pretty, right? You have to pick a pick a struggle. No, you have to pick a side, right? I grew up in the like stupid ass meme of like the blonde girl like in the hoochie outfit, and then like she picks up a book and all of a sudden is a brunette with a messy bun. I don't know. I'll put the meme here. I grew up in the era where this meme was popular, and I was one of those girls that really believed that I could not be smart and pretty, so I chose being a bookworm or whatever, and that was such an easy way to become self-loathing, and like it's just very damaging, especially to young girls. And I just hate seeing that rhetoric being perpetuated again as a whole ass adult. So I'm just letting y'all know that, like, yeah, this conversation will probably be ongoing forever. But please don't fall into the this or that thinking. Same with like romance covers, just because it's not my personal taste, like these cartoony covers are not my personal taste. I would be a hypocrite if I said that like this was purposely baiting children, because then I would have to criticize all the anime I watch, all the manga I read, and all the other adult cartoons and kids cartoons that I engage with as well, right? Like if we're going to make that argument about this, then we can easily make that argument about something like Family Guy. But yeah, if I was going to make that criticism about these popular romance covers, I would have to make that criticism about other things as well. And so I hope people are I think parents in particular really need to be parenting and a little bit more involved with their children's lives. I get it's like super hard out here, and I get people are having to work like multiple jobs and they can't be on top of everything, and you're gonna mess up as a parent when it comes to that stuff. Sure. I mean, damn. Like my dad was playing Mortal Kombat with us in diapers watching. Like, my parents were very loosey goosey about that kind of stuff, right? Like they let us watch The Simpsons, or they let us see things that were like slightly above our age level, right? But again, I would like to think we turned out okay. I don't know. There was other issues in the house that were a little bit more pressing than like whether or not we were watching Family Guy. So but yeah, so I obviously have a very biased perspective, sorry, but that is my perspective on this, and if it changes, great. If it doesn't change, okay. I think there's other problems in the book community right now, especially as it pertains to book bans over certain topics that are deemed controversial, or people being illiterate in this country, literacy levels decreasing, different educational systems losing funding, or there's just so much else to be worried about right now that I don't really have energy to give towards like aesthetics for book covers. So that's my 2 cents. Sorry it's so sassy. Sorry it's just a bunch of cold tea. But that's how I feel about it. And if you agree with me, let me know in the comments down below. If you disagree with me, that's fine. You can comment that as well. I don't mind. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. Like I said, you can comment down below. You can share this with a friend, or you can subscribe to my channel. Please, please, please. That would help me out a lot. And until next time, thanks. Bye.